Hello, and this is Zweistan, and this will be the final Federation tutorial video for Star Trek Armada II fleet operations. I've decided to split this part off in a separate video because I've already talked for a little over an hour about the Federation, and I believe you guys require some rest by now. Your ears must be drumming. We have a saying like you can hear like shh in your ears. Shumania, I don't know how to put that in English, I'm sorry. So basically, in this part, I'm going to talk about counter tables, and it's mostly not just counter tables, but countering the enemy strategies in a 1v1 matchup. So let's start with the Borg. In a 1v1 versus the Borg, brace for impact. Borg are nearly overpowered in a 1v1. In a dual 2 map, they are practically overpowered. If your opponent is a good Borg player, you're going to be hit with 2 Scout Cube, 3 probes rush very early. By the time you're probably gonna have 3 or 4 ships. So, and one of your ships is inferior to one of your opponent's ships. So brace for that. It's going to be hard for you to win this matchup unless you do something spectacular. You think of some weird strategy that specifically counters the Borg Scout Cube Rush. And basically, what you can expect from Borgs is Scout Cubes and probes, and your Intrepids will counter that nicely. Monsoons are not as good against Borgs because Borg have bigger ships, and Intrepid's torpedo isn't useless against them. Well, not useless, but it's a lot more useful than the second beam weapon of the Monsoon. So go Mason, pre- prepare for the rush by building Intrepids, um, and basically prepare for the enemy to switch into dodecahedrons, which, if you're wondering what the dodecahedron is, let me quickly plop one down for you. Okay, seems that we did not crash. This is a dodecahedron. This is a support vessel, so it'll do extra damage to your Intrepids. And yeah, expect these to come out fairly shortly if you're spamming Intrepid. So you're going to have to switch out to Akiras fairly soon when fighting against Borg. Like, what can you do against them? Basically, Warpin Rush is probably your best bet against them, just because you get 3 ships with Warpin Rush, and like, assuming they haven't taken out your mining and stalled you entirely, you should be able to do something against them. And Akira Rush is a second option, but with an Akira Rush, they'll probably hit you with Scout Cubes before you get your first Akira out. First 2 Akiras out, so maybe do an Akira Rush if you're Reasoner, but generally in a 1v1 you're going to be playing Mason anyway. If a Borg will sometimes do other rushes that are, for example, a simulator rush or a sphere rush. And a simulator rush can put a lot of pressure onto you because it makes your Intrepids and Monsoons useless because they don't have enough crew. In that case, you have to go Akiras and Warpins if you can, and hope you don't get a Rhode Island or a Centaur. And basically, when you're fighting simulators, it's it's a battle between can you take out enough enemy assimilators or get a large enough fleet, uh, or will the enemy overwhelm you? Because if an enemy gets 3 assimilators up and you don't have enough Akiras to punish them for it, like if you don't have enough Akiras to kill one of his assimilators by the time he gets 3 up, you've lost the game because they're just gonna start assimilating your Akiras. 125 crew is not enough to fight 3 assimilators. But on the other hand, if an opponent is going for a sphere, then again Akiras are going to do a decent job. Like regen spheres are going to be hard to kill, but in a 1v1 you're probably not going to see a sphere rush. Borg late game will consist of diamonds, and basically by the time the enemy hits diamonds you will want to have Akiras with their special. Monsoons are okay, but everything else is too fragile to fight diamonds. And if in a 1v1 your opponent is fielding diamonds, you're in a bad spot anyway. You should win the game before that, just because you're not going to be able to grab Urodi type Urodi yard ships to fight those. So yeah, with the Borg, and basically against Borg you're going to be defensive most of the time. Keep scouting to see their ships coming and move your fleet accordingly, and when you have enough ships to federal them, just federal them. Fighting against Borg in a 1v1, like as I said, it's pretty much the hardest thing to do, and you're going to be experiencing optimize rather than assimilate. In a team game, there's an option of you seeing what are they called, pyramids. You can't see them because they're under assimilate. Pyramids. The pyramid is generally not as good as a sphere, but its special ability, which is immediately takes out 10% of your crew. So if an enemy gets too many pyramids, that's a win condition for them. Don't let the enemy get too many pyramids if you can help it. Yes, this will happen in a team game, but still you should try to avoid it. Moving on towards Dominion. 1v1 Dominion is definitely in your advantage. Against Federation, the Dominion will basically have to go and try to get to its advanced shipyard. And what that means is you can definitely warping rush them. If they're going, they may sometimes go for S2s, but your monsoons can handle S2s, and I think Akiras can handle them as well. But generally, if you have monsoons and maybe some intrepid here or there, they're going to want a big shipyard, and that gives you time to tech up to Akiras. Or it gives you time to end up the game outright. So it's a matchup in your favor. In a team game, the Dominion will tend to stay behind, like will try to hide behind the its friends and build up a giant fleet. If it gets a giant fleet, there's not much you can do about it. But you should definitely, like, the Dominion late game ships are strong generally, so there's isn't anything specific I can tell you about how to counter those. Basically, you will want Akiras in the late game against Dominion. If you're going mass monsoons, you need to end it before that. And like Urodi helps, having a Urodi type yard as a reasoner helps, but it's not necessary. So against Dominion, basically all strategies work, and Dominion will have the hardest time punishing you for any forward yards you take or for any hard attacks you make. So with Dominion you can pretty much do what you want, like any of the before mentioned strategies. Um, with the Federation, now 1v1, this is a boring matchup. Uh, you're gonna see mostly Mason, you're gonna be Mason yourself, and it's going to be whoever can spam more monsoons. Like, Akira's will not work as well because they tend to miss a lot against monsoons. Sometimes you will fight Intrepids versus Intrepids. Intrepids are they they will tend to lose a fight against monsoons, but Intrepids can raid a lot better than monsoons because you can just start taking out enemies, storage dogs. You can start taking out enemies, shipyards once you have enough. So Intrepids will, in the long run, win out against monsoons, but it's going to be a mirror match and a boring one at that. So a lot of back and forth and quite a long game because you're both going to be wanting to hit the Federal. Against Feds, you can warp in rush, you can go for a warp in opening, or you can go for a double shipyard. Um, I'd I'd say early warp-ins are better because the Feds won't raid you as fast as some of the other races can, so you don't need to plop down that second shipyard too fast. But it's up to you what you want to do. If you're feeling especially cheeky, you can try Akira rushing them, but Akira rush usually isn't too sustainable against the Feds. In a team game, what you can expect from Feds is either more of the same, so Intrepids, Monsoons, or Akira rushes, or you can expect, uh, you can more often than not expect a phalanx rush, which is which is not a rush because it's not an attack rush because your attack is going to be fairly late. It's a hard tech rush, and in that games you need to be quite careful uh, because if your enemy gets a lot of phalanxes, like 3 or 4 together, your small ships are gonna start dying, and even your Akiras are gonna start dying. Also, one of the ways sometimes uh, phalanx rushes are executed, it's not a rush in that case anymore, but the people will open up with a warp-in rush or early warp-ins, and try to use the warp-ins to keep you at bay, keep you on your toes while they attack 2 phalanxes back in their base. Definitely scout your enemy and keep an eye out for forward expansions because, as I've said in the previous video, Federation constructors, which I haven't placed this time around, um, are the fastest constructors around. So, moving on quickly to the Klingons, most of the time you can expect a Martok with 1v1 Klingons, especially against Federation. And against Klingons, unfortunately, you are on a timer against good Klingons. Can you Federal them before they get Wood Pass? The Klingons can have many options against you. They can try to go for a Bird of Prey expansion or Cabbage expansion and raid you to death. So dual Cabbage or dual Bird of Prey or a mix of both. That's definitely one option you're gonna be seeing from them, and in that case you want, against Bird of Prey you want Monsoons, and Intrepids can also be the choice for you. You don't want Akiras against Bird of Prey because Quartz will eat your Akiras. Quartz have single stage energy conduits, which gives them bonus damage against medium range. If your opponent is going for Sangs, you once again you don't want Akiras in that case because Sangs are as fast as Akiras but long range. They're glass cannons with but Akiras can't catch them and they will annihilate your fleets of Akiras. So against Klingons you definitely want to open up Monsoons or Intrepids and see what they are doing. You might want to open up double yard early opener with them just because Klingons can pop their freighters and run away with them. And as I said, if they're going towards, most of the warpins are medium range, so you don't want too many cohorts, too many warpins against cohorts. And the Klingons, if they execute a rush, especially if they execute a Katinga rush, they can hit your expansion fairly early, so you will want a second shipyard here before going warpins, unless you're absolutely sure your warpins are gonna be successful. Um, in the mid to late game, the Klingon is going to switch to Warchas, which are going to counter your short range ships entirely. In that case, you have to tech to Akiras, but once that happens, you're on a slippery slope at that point. Like, the problem is you probably won't be producing many monsoons anymore. You'll switch to Akiras, which are torpedo ships and Novas if you can, and those are gonna fight. They're gonna trade decently well with Warchas, but if you can't get your numbers up to end it by this point, and your opponent manages to get Wood Pass going, then that's a problem, because Wood Pass are going to completely annihilate your Akiras again. Also, since you haven't been building many monsoons at the time, you're not gonna have like the beam phaser array ships to deal with them, and Wood Pass are really dangerous because if we check one right now, they might be here. Yes, Wood Pass has a targeting scrambler, which gives it a 55% avoidance against torpedo-based weapons. It's going to be very hard for your Akiras to kill Wood Pass. There's also the other problem with Klingons where they can start going one Warcha, one Sank, and at that point you're going to want to keep the number of their Sanks as low as possible, and you're gonna want to alternate monsoons and Akiras. Basically, the Klingons, as I've said, like the longer the fight goes, the lower the chances of your winning. If the Klingons get to the late game and you start seeing the Borfas ship, so this ship, then if you've gone for a monsoon spam or an intrepid spam and you see this ship, that's your game over. You'll see this game in multiplayer, but even if you have a lot of Akiras, these ships, you're gonna see 3 of them. So once the enemy has three of these ships and researches the artificial ion storm ability, the artificial ion storm, when fired with all 3 ships, will just annihilate fleets of like Novas, Intrepids, Monsoons, and Sabers. Like against in a late game, if the enemy gets 3 of these, like you're gonna have a very hard time fighting them. It's still possible to win, but if this happens in a team game, there's a good chance that your enemies are going to be supporting this. So it's going to be hard for you to win against the Borfas combo. Unless you've got upgraded shields and Akiras plus late game ships, which can really withstand those ion storms. Romulans, your hardest 1v1 matchup, possibly as hard as Borg or maybe even harder. That the problem with you fighting the Romulans is this ship. This ship will be your friend. Uh, you will probably see Helev and go levels. Helev gives increased offensive value to levels as well as reduces their supply cost by 50%. Additionally, this ship, its metaphasic disruptor, can easily snipe your ships. Its auto repair systems make it virtually indestructible unless you've got enough ships to kill it. And with Federation, your gun that works against you because your ships have weaker offensive values. And advanced energy reeling is just the icing on the cake. These ships will raid you. They are really fast, they will raid you, and they counter anything that's not a monsoon. They will counter warpins, they will counter intrepids, they will counter novas, they will counter akiras. They will counter anything that's not Avalon, Defiant, or Phalanx, and they will even counter those because in order for your opponent to get to get warp to get levels, basically what they need is not an upgrade, a research institute, and they're gonna need their shipyard, so the Star Yard. This is what they need to produce levels, and levels will eat you. If if an enemy is building Rians against you, then you're lucky. That means they're probably not as skilled, and you can easily counter Rians with monsoons. If they're building Griffins, then you can go Intrepids, but watch out, because if an enemy building Griffins versus Federation means that they're gonna build 2 or 3 Griffins, try to snipe your scout, and then switch into Levals, and you're back. And you're back with monsoons, because nothing else will kill mass Levals. Like, only monsoons will kill them if you get enough of them once you get to it. So with against Romulan, the only real opening you have is the double shipyard opening, after which you hard spam monsoons. You try to get your Starfleet science up as soon as possible, because proxy torp will help a lot, and you try raiding enemy Stratenium as hard as possible. The enemy will, if they're doing the hardest possible Leval Rush, they probably won't be able to expand too much, and the walls are very, very expensive on the Tritanium, so try to raid their Tritanium. The Romulan freighters are easier to raid, so you don't need as many monsoons, and try not to get caught by enemy levels. If an enemy has an equal amount of levels as you monsoons, or about, if you have like 50% more monsoons than enemy levels, the game is still going in their favor. You need more, because you will need to snipe those levels before the enemy starts getting serious rank outs on them. If an enemy gets the officer, or God forbid veteran rank on their levels, that's how they win the game. That's how the Romulans win the game. Their ships are expensive and slow to build, so they will try to rank them up and then kill your fleet. Basically, finding the Romulans is frustrating, because you are going to be seeing you're going to be seeing a very Romulan play, where they like hit you where they're weak and fade, and then hit and fade, and you're gonna be on your toes a lot, trying to figure out what to do, how to fight them. It's not an easy matchup at all. In team games, you're pretty much going to see the same 3 ships. The Romulans are not very well balanced when it comes to team games, there are only three useful ships are Levels, Griffins, and let's see, Levels 3Ns, which are these ships, and the Griffins, which cannot see here. Have I? Let me see. Generics? No. Terdex? No. Norix? No. Let me check. I cannot find it. I cannot find it. Oh, here it is. My bad. So the Griffins, these ships. These ships are. There's a special problem with them where they're not. They're good ships when there's few of them, but the more your enemy gets, the more overpowering they get because their special ability, Sensor Jammer, actually does damage and it deals damage. So if an enemy gets a stupid fleet of 10, 15 Griffins, they're going to decloak in the middle of your fleet, use their Sensor Jammer, and the Sensor Jammer is going to at the very least strip you of your shields, if not just outright destroy some of your weaker ships. So they get stupidly good once there's a lot of them, but they need to get that critical mass, and you can prevent that critical mass by building Intrepids against them or Monsoons. As I said, against Romulans you're mostly going to see levels. In team games you're going to see Rians with a possible disruptor or torpedo Rians if an enemy is feeling like doing something different that works. Rarely you'll see Circus. Circus are annoying to fight, but they can be dealt with just because they're very, very squishy. If you manage to decloak Circus, that's just the end of the game. Circus is a squishy ship that's expensive. So that's what you're going to be seeing with Romulans, and if they go for Warbirds, you're gonna be seeing Salas. So Salas, rarely you're going to be seeing Eresis. Silas are basically, they're pretty good, but Eresis are cheaper and better and easier to produce. This is a fairly fast warbird that's medium range. It's an okay ship, but its special is locked behind Talciar facility, so your opponent's going to need to delve a bit deeper into tech if they want to grab Eresis special ability. But the warbirds can be dealt with because the warbirds are really expensive and you're not going to be seeing many of them. And like against Silas, Akira should work, Monsoon should work even better. Against Eresis, Akiras won't work because they have ADAI, but once again they're a medium range ship, so Intrepids should work. And Monsoons as well, but that's what you will see in team games. If an enemy goes for Tawara, if you don't kill them in time, it's your own fault. Basically, in a team game, I know that can happen, but a Tawara, it's strong, but it's not as strong of a presence to be game-changingly broken. It's a good ship, but that can win the games if used correctly, but it's not game-changingly broken. So yeah, let's see if I've forgotten anything. Oh, Borg. Sometimes Borg will get cheeky, and Borg will get really cheeky in a team game, especially if there's 2 Borg or 3 Borg on the same team, and they're going to go possibly assimilate, possibly optimize, I'm not sure, and they're going to build a cube. No, and they're going to rush a cube, and they're going to rush a proper tactical cube. Maybe sometimes what we call a ghetto cube, which is an assimilation cube with that's like as cheap as possible on both titanium and dilithium. But if that happens, well, then your team is faced with an exceedingly powerful vessel at the time where you have no counters. And what happens then? It's basically it's sacrifice time. You're going to be sacrificing players in order to stop the enemy. For the enemy to do this, they meant the entire team had to pull resources into this one ship. And yes, you can't deal with it initially, but in the long term you'll be able to. This is a very small ship, slow ship rather, not small, and on a huge map it's gonna take a while for it to hit your base. And once it hits your base, it's gonna take a while for it to hit the second player. So you're going to have to sacrifice the players. Initially you're not going to be able to defend against it, but your entire team should pull their fleet together and basically kill your opponent's economy, because that's going to be very possible. For the cube to hit the field early, it means that the opponents are gonna have to sacrifice their ships. So dealing with cube is basically ignore it until mid to late game, where and in the meantime you have to be killing your opponent's expansions, you have to be killing your opponent's bases if you can. And then at one point what will happen is your opponent simply won't have the fleet together. They're gonna have a cube and maybe like a diamond or and a bunch of other ships, but you're gonna have a much larger fleet. Your team's gonna have a much larger fleet to deal with the cube, and then you hit it like the battle of sector 001. Just hit it with the entire fleet in the late game, and as soon as that cube dies, that's usually where your opponents surrender, because by that time they've lost up a couple of bases and they've basically put all their eggs in one basket, or rather in one cube. So uh, that's it. I'm thinking if I have forgotten something about the counter table. Maybe we still have about 10 minutes, so we can go you can maybe go through the entire ship roster and see what they counter. So basically sabers, they don't counter much. They're useful in raiding, but they don't counter much. Monsoons are good all around, but they counter the enemy long range ships because of the high density shield generators. They do particularly well against those, but they can be a counter to some short range ships as well, especially if they're small. Intrepids generally counter medium range ships due to their autonomous defense AI, but they do poorly against short and not short range ships, but against special ships, not support ships. There you go, support ships. The word eluded me. Noahs are again they are support ships, but they don't count as a support ship. So this is not a support vessel, but it's there. But it is there to support your ships. It's a general all-round vessel that you want with your Intrepids and with your Akiras. Same with your Akiras. They're going to counter war chars, as I've said, and they're going to counter ships with ablative armor, not because they do more damage to ablative armor, but because monsoons and intrepids are both short range, so they're going to be countering that. Canaverals are going to be countering themselves out of the game. Basically, don't build Canaverals, as I've said in the previous videos. They do extra damage against short range ships, but they don't really do enough damage for the extra damage bonus to kick in. Norways are short range phaser ships. I don't know, they're not useful, they don't counter anything in particular, ignore them. As for your warpins, apart from Excelsior, which counters medium range ships with this autonomous defense AI, everything else is either a general list or it counters long range ships. Warpins are generally weak versus short range ships, and they are medium range and they counter long range ships, because you can see this with high density shield generators on Ambassador and the tactical weapons arrays on the Galaxy. The Centaur is a shield disruptor, but that doesn't matter as much, and everything else is basically a generalist. Descent itself is a generalist, but as I've said, like, use the descent in mid to late game or in an early game if you're attacking a star base and doing, but that means you have to be doing particularly well. um, Descent is a generalist as well. Teutoburg, ignore it. If you need to bombard structures, I've said in the previous video, use torpedo platforms. Excelsiors, well, if they are Mason's Excelsiors, you might want to start building them if an enemy builds a cube, or if you start seeing battleships on the field, but generally Excelsiors don't counter anything unless it's Mason's Excelsior. Remorse are good against torpedo ships, but you won't be seeing many of them around, and as I said, I've heard point defense causes these things. It shouldn't, because Armada 2 had point defense and Armada 1 had point defense, but I've heard it can. I think it's a false positive when it comes to that, but still, you won't be seeing many Remorse around. Avalons are good offensive vessels that can eviscerate small fleets if you get enough of them, but generally they don't counter anything specific unless your opponent is really weak against long range vessels. They're a good vessel to have with you in the mid game. Defiant kinda counter both short range and both long range. They have tactical weapons arrays, but they also have ablative armor plates, but Defiants are, you won't be building them because they take too long to build. Maybe if you're double yarding, but then you should probably be double yarding Sovereigns and Phalanxes. So Defiants are, they're, I don't know, they're generalist, I'd say, but they can counter long range vessels better than Sovereign, for example. Sovereigns are a generalist that's extra good against short range ships because it has ablative armor plates. But you won't be building Sovereigns to counter something. You'll probably be spamming Phalanxes, and Phalanxes are just general all around good ships. So that's the Federation. A lot of generalists with very few direct counters. No early pulse weapons means that they can struggle with raiding, and they can struggle against ships that have high torpedo avoidance, but you do have options. You always have some options that do at least something. In a 1v1, I'd say they're worse off. In a 1v1, I'd say the Borg are the best, followed by either Romulans or Klingons. I'd say Romulans second, Klingons third, and then there's Federation, and last is Dominion. So if we set them up like this, so basically you're gonna, as I've said, you're going to struggle against these because your weakness is pitted against Romulan strength. So that's the problem with when fighting Romulans. With Borg, you're just going to be fighting large ships very early, because even a Scout Cube is a large ship. I think it technically counts as a medium, but it's going to be there. It's going to be in your face very early, and you're not going to have, if it's executed really well, you're not going to have a fleet yet to really deal with it. Against Borg, you just try not to lose too many ships and try to build up your fleet. It's actually more important. That's something I forgot to mention. It's more important not to lose your fleet, against your Borg than it is to lose an expansion. Sometimes it's good to abandon an expansion and then attempt to expand elsewhere, or come back in and expand once the Borg are gone, if they're giving you some respite. I don't know how to pronounce. I know the word. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. With Klingons, as I've said, see what they're doing, so and watch out so you don't build in into their counter. But it's doable if you attack them early. Warp warping rush maybe, or maybe go for double shipyard and attempt to build monsoons from two shipyards and kill them that way. Federation, long-winded game. If you don't know what to do, just copy your opponent. But generally, monsoon intrepids win against monsoons. Long-term, Akiras are not good because intrepids are there, and monsoons are better. Warpins against warpins. If you're the faster in this game, you have an advantage, and against Dominion, you have an advantage anyway. If they're going for tier 2 yard, switch from monsoons into Akiras. If you're certain they're gonna go for tier 2 yard, or are feeling really good about your games, you can actually Akira rush them. There's the least amount of danger in Akira rushing Dominion. But if they're going S2s, like Intrepid Monsoons or Monsoon Intrepid mix, will kill S2s really easily. Dominion doesn't have a good time against Federation unless they get to the very late game. Hey everyone, this is Zweistein doing a final post-production recording. Thank you guys for watching all of my tutorial videos. They took a while to make, so I'm grateful for that. The future, what does this hold for? It's basically, I'm thinking of maybe casting some games if I can, either from first person or post-production. I may try in casting them in real time, but I already stutter a little bit when translating words from my language into English in my head, so maybe that's not the best idea for me. Um, and as far as tutorial videos goes, if there's more demand for them, I'll definitely see if I can make more. There's not much to talk about, but if people need some extra explanation, I guess I can do that. And if people want to see other races, just note that I'm a specialized Federation player, so I'm not good with the other races, but I can give you a general, like, quick and dirty rundown of at least what I've seen played against me when I played Federation, so that you may have a general idea of what to look at if you're playing those other races. So once again guys, thank you for watching this video, and thank you for watching the series, and I'll see you guys around. Zweistein out.